Experienced Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'd like to share my recent conversation with Mike Gaynor. Mike is a second-year student in our full-time MBA class of 2026, and he and I recently connected to talk more about his background, his decision to pursue an MBA, what led him to Darden, how his career goals have evolved during his time here at Darden, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the Experienced Darden podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Mike Gaynor. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
All right, good to speak with you. How's your day going?
My day is great. We just wrapped up another busy week. We're a little more than halfway through the quarter right now, so settling into year two. But no, definitely no complaints here. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, how does it feel to be a second-year student?
It's very different. Obviously, the experience changes a little bit because first year, for the most part, you're in core, with your section. So we've got more freedom now, taking electives, which is exciting, interesting. I'm focusing on more AI quantitative classes. That's kind of where I feel the most comfortable. So getting a chance to take a lot of those, something I'm really enjoying. But, it's a bit of a transition period. And especially now that we have new first years on grounds, it's different, but exciting.
Can we talk a little bit about your AI coursework? I know we have some listeners that likely perked up when you said, oh, you're taking a lot of AI classes. Can you tell us about one of the classes you're taking right now?
Right. So I'm taking machine learning and AI for business. My professor is Michael Albert. He's got a lot of experience in the space. So we're doing a lot of coding with Python in Jupyter Notebook. We're doing a lot of regression challenges, basically understanding different machine learning models, how they work, best use cases. So sort of a very foundational class for anybody who's looking to be in the data science world. And sort of understand more about AI and how to apply those principles, concepts to business.
Have you been someone who's always interested in kind of technology or artificial intelligence, these kinds of things?
Yeah. I've been a technology user basically my whole life. I started playing video games before I could read. My siblings would sit with me and read me dialogue, so I knew how to play. And that love of technology has sort of persisted through my life. I was the first year tech rep in Section E. And as a part of that, I sit on the Darden Student Technology Advisory Board, sort of advising the school about how students interact with technology and sort of ways that they can implement new technology. And so even in undergrad, I had 2 years of computer science coursework before I ultimately decided to major in math. So I would say it's been a common thread. And so it's been great to continue that and, further my understanding here.
Interesting. Artificial intelligence feels like there's starting to be two camps developing, maybe a middle as well, but like there's a camp that's enthusiastic, there's another camp that's very pessimistic, and maybe very concerned about where all this technology is leading, and then maybe a group of people kind of in the middle are trying to figure out what all this might mean. What's exciting to you about artificial intelligence, or interesting to you about artificial intelligence?
I think I'm kind of in the middle, I would say. I'm concerned about it, but ultimately I don't really think it's going anywhere. I think it's going to generate some pretty extreme structural changes, not just in the business landscape, but throughout sort of all layers and aspects of society. So I think as someone in business, it's just really important to, become familiar, develop an understanding, sort of be able to apply these tools in a business context. because ultimately I know there will be others out there who do. Um, and it's going to be such a force multiplier that at a certain level, I think without it, you won't be able to compete in a certain sense. So it's, obviously it's still early, but the progression that I've seen from different AI models in the last year or so um, is a lot greater than I anticipated. Um, so things are just changing very rapidly. And so it's sort of exciting to see the progression, but also a little nerve-wracking. So in some senses, I'm along for the ride, but I'm I'm trying to keep up as best I can.
Well, it must be nice to be able to take classes to learn about these things. Like, otherwise, folks are out in the world just reading newspaper articles, trying to catch up. But to have school and class to kind of learn how you could use these tools and learn about the tools, that must be really nice.
Yeah, it's great. I'm really glad. I know oftentimes in an educational context, there's a bit of a lag between what's happening in industry and what's happening in education, um, just because it takes time for that to trickle down. But I think I've been impressed by Darden's ability to bring sort of those leading edge um, principles and ideas and what's happening in industry into the classroom.
Well, Mike, let's talk a little bit more about you and your background. We started to get a little bit of a picture, but tell us more about you. Who are you?
Sure. I am I'm Mike Gaynor. I'm 28 years old, from Phoenix, Arizona, born and raised. Um, I went to Arizona State University for my undergraduate degree. I majored in math. I spent 4 years after college working for my dad, actually. Um, I graduated during COVID, sort of, 2020. And his business needed some, help. I think a lot of businesses needed help. And the job market was unusual, shall we say. So I made the decision to go work for him, first as an estimator and then managing sort of a division of the company. Um, he's in the commercial printing business. So printing things like books, booklets, brochures, a lot of, marketing material. Um, So that was where I've gotten the majority of my real life business experience, um, working in a manufacturing environment, which was kind of exciting to me, and sort of maybe unusual these days. But at a certain point, I decided it was time to, move on and do something else. And I was able to sort of leave my role in a position where they no longer needed me. Um, and so I decided to apply to business school. Um, Business school had been on my radar for some time. My parents actually met in business school. Um, so I was kind of familiar. I knew I wanted a case method school. And above and beyond that, I knew I wanted a community, not just, an education, but a place where I could really grow um, and develop relationships interpersonally. Um, So I was just very fortunate to get into Darden, and be able to spend 2 years here developing.
Let me go back in your story a little bit, Mike. That's very interesting working for your father and the manufacturing industry. Um, it feels like that's an industry, sort of that's printing, all of that has kind of gone through a lot of disruption. What was it like to help out the family business?
Um, Printing is a little tough. um, it's an industry that's been contracting for a long time. Um, so it's kind of a constant fight just to maintain status quo. And you definitely feel that not only in the day to day, but in the long term strategy. Um, so it was kind of, a lot of good lessons to learn, um, a lot of effort to put in to kind of keep to keep the business going. Um, and I really like a manufacturing environment. I like making real things. But obviously in our economic context, it's getting harder and harder to compete. So, we definitely feel that. Um,
Yeah. What are some of the lessons that you feel like you took away from that experience? I'm sure there was a lot to learn.
there was definitely a lot to learn. Um, I think I think the biggest lesson for me was sort of the way to effectively manage. Um, when I came into the organization, I was 22, and a lot of the people with whom I was working were in their 50s and 60s. Um, and so, in that context, especially as the son of the owner, um, it's understandable that people would not want to take direction from not only a young person, but also, someone who's sort of the beneficiary of that family dynamic. So figuring out the way to sort of earn a place amongst them, um, and be able to develop those relationships and prove to them that, um, I had the business's best interests in mind. I had their best interests in mind, and sort of be able to work with them effectively and honestly learn a lot from them. Um, they taught me so much. You know, a lot of them had 30 years in the printing industry. I had never printed anything except off of an office printer. Um, so, um, it was a very unique experience, but it was a cool experience. And I think one that helped me grow quite a bit in a number of ways.
So it sounds like the choice to come to Darden was a very intentional one for you. You were looking for a community. I would say want to be challenged academically. What was the adjustment like for you being a new student at Darden in graduate business school?
It's interesting. I think for most of us, where we spend roughly 4 5 years in industry or working before we come back to business school, and so it is an adjustment to be back in school, because in some ways you just sort of forget what the experience is like. You spend your whole life up until undergrad, you're in school year after year, and you sort of get comfortable with that, and then all of a sudden you're not on a school schedule. You're working however many hours, 5 days a week, or sometimes weekends, and things are a little more flexible. Um, so it was an adjustment. Um, and it takes certainly a few weeks to sort of get get familiar, get reacquainted with how school life is. But it's it's definitely been a great experience. Um, just being able to focus on learning, to be honest with you, and not have to, worry about the sort of the constant day-to-day struggles of keeping some things going. Um, it's it's a good experience. It's a new experience, but at a certain point, it does feel familiar. It all comes back to you. I think it's like riding a bicycle, maybe.
Yeah, actually, just interviewed someone else for another podcast episode. I think that's the metaphor they used as well, right? You remember doing it, even if you haven't done it for a while. It kind of comes back, maybe a little bit wobbly at the beginning, but you eventually settle
Absolutely.
in. What
Hmm.
section were you in your first year?
Section E,
All right, the eels. What was
the
your favorite
eels.
thing about being in section E?
Um, every, I mean, if you ask anybody, they'll always say that their section is the best. It's kind of a lighthearted joke. Um, I think in some circles, Section E is known as a very familial section. We have sort of very close interpersonal relationships. We sort of treat everybody in the section like family. Often we have a lot of people in the section who have their own families and kids. Um, they'll bring those kids to events. We had last year one of our section mates, his wife had a kid, and he invited the whole section to his baby's blessing. And about 25 of us attended that, which was just a very cool experience. So just the community, the sense of belonging that you feel with your section mates is undoubtedly the thing that's going to stick with me the most.
Was learning through the case method new for you? Was that different?
That is very different. Obviously, I think everyone relates to this. You spend your whole academic career learning through a lecture style. And so, the case method is much different, but in a good way. Um, in one perspective, I think in some ways it's more on the students, and in some ways it's less on any particular individual because the expectation is that you bring your knowledge and experience and you can share that with the 69 others in your section. And the expectation is they'll do the same. So you're learning not just from one person, but you're learning from everybody. And you'll hear very cool stories about people who worked in industry, in one particular topic. And they have something to share about their experience that you never considered in a million years. Um, and not only that, but it's training for sitting in a business meeting and speaking up and participating, sharing your thoughts in sort of a clear and concise way. Um, it's it's one of the reasons that I really wanted to come to Darden. And I would say it's really lived up to what I hoped it would be. Um, it's it's a much more engaging experience than sitting in a lecture for an hour and a half, which frankly at this stage of my life I just wasn't as interested in doing. Um, so it's definitely a highlight of my experience here. There's no doubt about it.
I've heard from many people that it's always an adjustment, when you're coming.
Mm.
Maybe you've had seminars or things like that in the past, but this being the way that you learn here, it's discussion based. You have to show up for class ready to contribute and participate, and maybe some classes that you have no prior experience with. Did you have any classes that were completely new to you?
Um, yeah, I would say econ, global econ and finance are really the two I have no formal background in. Um, so it was cool to be able to hear from people who not only studied economics, but also had been teachers in economics themselves in some contexts. And the same with finance, being able to learn from people who had been bankers in industry, and how they operated and sort of, being able to apply the cases that we were studying in real time, and how does that look in a business context? What's similar? What might be a little bit different depending on the firm or the industry, or um, so on and so forth. So it's definitely it's a cool and unique experience for sure.
Wondering how your career goals have evolved, or maybe they haven't, but how have your career goals evolved during your time here?
Um, yeah, I think going into Darden, I didn't have a strong career path in mind. I didn't have anything set in stone. Um, I was sort of open to any possibilities, especially having worked really only for my dad and not really having worked in a traditional business environment. Um, I was kind of open to the possibilities. I worked in my summer internship in a private equity firm over the summer, which was a very cool experience, sort of a unique experience. A smaller firm of about 20 people. Um, and so I sort of got to see more of a financial sector side of things. Um, I think these days, what really interests me most, I would say, is going back to the AI piece that we touched on. Um, I'm really looking for a company in a role where I can sort of work closely in that area, whether it's an AI product itself or heavy AI involvement in development. Um, and so I think what's interesting me most right now is looking at leadership development programs um, in the tech sector. I think I've still got a lot of learning to do. I think in some ways we all do, but that to me seems like the most exciting opportunity to be able to sort of work in that field and in that area, and also get some more training on the job.
Very interesting. I'm sure some of our listeners are curious about finding a private equity internship. We have a number of prospective students who are curious about that. What's the process you went through to find that? Was it something you found through on-grounds recruiting? Was it more of a network-driven search? Just curious.
Um, yeah, so private equity recruiting is much more um, personal, I would say, than something like investment banking recruiting or consulting. Um, to my knowledge, there's no really established pipeline for something like that. Um, I was the the beneficiary of a professor, one of my professors in Section E, who actually worked with me and sort of helped me land this particular internship, um, which is not entirely uncommon. I think one of the one of the most amazing things to me about Darden has been the faculty, and not only how much they're willing to engage with the students, and you know develop sort of these working relationships with students and help them in their career goals. But the quality of teaching, how they execute the case method, which I know is sort of a much more difficult um, thing to do than just teaching in a lecture style. So I've really been so impressed by them, and being able to learn from them and work with them, and know that they're doing what they can to support the students is very, very cool.
Do you have a favorite class that you've taken thus far? Something that stands out to you? Maybe it's something you're looking forward to, but do you have a favorite class?
Uh, I would say so far my favorite class was first quarter marketing in the core. Um, I don't have much of a marketing background, and in our business context, we didn't really do too much marketing. Um, so that was kind of a very cool introduction to the world of marketing. And the fact that it's a blend of quantitative and also qualitative considerations, it sort of makes it a very interesting challenge. Um, and being able to learn from Kim Whitler, uh, who's had so much experience in industry and worked at a high level in so many companies, it was just very cool.
Was not expecting marketing, so always fun to ask that question and hear what comes back. Well, Mike, obviously you're in your second year now. You're taking electives. The end is near, so to speak. But what are some things that you're excited about that you're involved with this year?
So right now I'm a member of the Darden Student Association, which is sort of the student body leadership at Darden. Um, and I kind of describe us as the bridge between the administration and the students. Um, and we're sort of, in my eyes, responsible for making the experience of Darden students the best that it can be. Um, so we're hosting a tailgate tomorrow before the football game. We host a lot of events throughout the year. All of the Darden Cup events are something that we run. Um, so, basically doing the best job we can do for the students, and making their experience something that remember fondly, for the next decades, is something that I'm really enjoying.
How'd you decide that you wanted to get involved with DSA?
Um, they send out an email that has a list of roles. Um, I honestly hadn't been too familiar with DSA during my first year, um, but they sent out an email looking for people to apply. And ultimately, the role of University Judiciary Committee representative is one that appealed to me. Basically, we're judges that adjudicate all kinds of issues related to the 12 standards of conduct, defined by UVA. Um, that was something that I just thought would be sort of an interesting role and a way to give back to the community. Something that sort of spoke to me, and so I ran for it and was lucky enough to be elected by my peers. Um, and and so here we are.
All right. Well, I'm sure that keeps you busy as well. Are there other things that you're looking forward to in the months ahead? Things that you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm excited to continue taking these electives. Um, Sort of have maybe that more second year experience where you're sort of, enjoying the relationships that you've built, and sort of, you know, the enjoying the time you have left, before we have to go out and, accomplish great things. Um, in some senses, I already miss it. So I'm trying to stay as involved around grounds as I can, even if that doesn't mean in a DSA context. Um, just working with other organizations, um, and just trying to help other students sort of find their way. Um, but it's a very special experience. One that I'm going to miss a lot, I think. So to the extent that I can be around as much as possible, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, very familiar refrain from second year students, really trying to soak up these last months that they have as a MBA student. It's a rare opportunity to be with this group of people in this kind of setting. It's harder to achieve out there as a working professional. Well, Mike, one more question for you, and we'll wrap up here. But um, any advice for our prospective student listeners? Anything you would encourage them to consider as they think about their own MBA journeys?
Yes, I would say that in my experience, a lot is made about quantifying things, um, and rankings, and everybody wants to try to distill everything down into the most digestible form, um, and sort of find ways to shortcut, um, sort of maybe a process for looking at an MBA, or so on and so forth. I think, in my experience, and obviously I was looking for a top MBA program. In my experience, finding a place where you fit in and where the community resonates with you, where you feel like they'll help you become the best person you could be, um, is more important than anything else. I think I've grown so much more here than I would have at any other school. And it's not just because of the case method. It's not just because the faculty are amazing. Um, it's because I was integrated into this community, that's sort of uplifted me, um, and accepted me. Um, so that's what I would think of if I were out there looking. Where do I feel like I'm going to find my home? And then I think ultimately that's where you'll end up doing your best work.
I think it's a great place to end. Mike, thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks, Brett.
And that was my conversation with Mike Gaynor, a second year student in our full time MBA class of 2026. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.